So I said I was going to do a dedicated video to talk about Suckless, so here it is. Let's get started. Good afternoon everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you've never heard of Suckless before, basically they're a group of people who make software that they describe as sucking less. But the problem is they've got some very interesting ideas about how software should be made, and very interesting ideas about their community. They're best known for software like DWM, which is a tiling window manager, a very minimalist tiling window manager, ST, which is the simple terminal, which is a very minimalist terminal, and another one is Surf, and once again, that is a very minimalist piece of software. This time it's a web browser. It doesn't even have tabbing by default. So the DWM page shows the clearest view of their philosophy. So they list things like having no Lua integration as a feature, and having the goal of only ever having less than 2,000 lines of code, as if that somehow actually relates to anything meaningful besides a pretty much a pointless goal. If you want to keep it under 2,000, that's cool, but you're not really achieving anything there. And they specifically say the reason that they don't release binary packages of DWM is because it forces users to compile the source code, and that will keep new users away and stopping people from asking stupid questions. The problem is that at some point everyone's going to be a new user of your software, and actually going and customizing it, sure, you can know how to actually compile the source code by yourself and do all those things, but the documentation is absolutely horrible. So even if you understand C, you will have to read through thousands of lines of C code to actually understand how to make any changes to it, rather than properly documenting it. And to be fair to Suckless, the fact that everything is written in C and you can't actually make any changes to dynamic config files does make all of their software very quick. But that doesn't mean that there's no reason to document it within the source code. Sure, let's say we just don't have dynamic config files. I can accept that. That's entirely fine. I can modify C header files. Learning C is not difficult. If you know Java, you can learn C pretty quickly. It's just a bit of semantic difference. The syntax is identical. So if we take ST for example, which is what I have the most experience with, that's the terminal that I'm currently running. To make simple changes, you just have to modify the config header file. That's fine. You can do theming, and you can do your fonts, and you can change hotkeys in there. But the problem is when you want to do something like re-implementing clearing. So the way that I ended up dealing with this was by just literally running the clear command within the shell. And the problem with this was that I had to dig through, I would say, about 2,600 lines of C code in the st.c file to actually find a function that I could use to output to the terminal, because none of the functions are documented. So I had to pretty much just guess what the names do and then read through them and try to work out if that's the right one. I ended up finding a function called ttywrite, and then using a bit of a hack fix to force a line end on the end of that, and then I could just run a function like that. So now if I want to do anything like that in the future, then I can just use that function that I've made. But it shouldn't have been this difficult to just find the function that lets you output to the terminal. That should be something that is pretty simple to find, because there is a lot of reasons why you'd want to access that, and it shouldn't be something that is just hidden behind the lack of documentation. Because it's not like ST is a small project or anything. There's a lot of people working on it, but the problem is, I have heard reports from some people that if you try to submit pull requests that add documentation to it, they just flat out reject them because you don't need added documentation. So because of this reluctance to accept documentation and the refusal to make binary packages, what ends up happening is you get this very elitist community that starts forming around Suckless software, which sure, does achieve the goal of not having new users asking questions, except for those people who know enough to actually compile the software but don't actually know enough about the Suckless software itself, but we'll ignore that for now. So it does achieve the goal of getting rid of most of the new users, but I don't think that this should be a goal that you actually go after. So what ends up happening is if you go on places like Reddit, and not as much Stack Overflow, because that tends to be a far more professional platform, sometimes not, but mainly Reddit, what ends up happening is whenever you ask anything about a piece of Suckless software, unless it's something really complicated, most people will just shoot you down and say you shouldn't be using this software. Obviously the people who aren't just like Suckless fanatics like me, who use their software but accept that the documentation is terrible and actually want people to use it. But the fanatics, what they will tend to do is they will look at your comment, say, this person shouldn't be using anything that Suckless makes because they don't know how to actually do every single thing in the piece of software. They shouldn't be asking questions, they should just work it out themselves. And all this happens because of this philosophy around the Suckless software and the idea that new users shouldn't be using it. I would like to see the Suckless software go down this route where you can configure it with a config file, or you can go modify the source code if you want to. Most of the Suckless software, you can actually install patches to go and actually modify them in a different way rather than just modifying the source code. So with ST, for example, there's an X resources patch. So you can install that patch and then modify themes and things like that through the use of that. I don't have it installed because I don't really customize my theme often. I just set up one and then use it from there. But if you are someone who actually does that, the community patches actually do help you. But I wish that these features were actually built into it by default, because things like this are actually pretty common uses. Like with ST, for example, it doesn't even have mouse scrolling, which I feel like most people probably use. I know there's some people who are absolute keyboard users and will never touch a mouse to scroll through their terminal, but I don't think most people are like that, and I'm definitely not, that's for sure. So you may think that I'm just complaining about this software with no plan to actually do anything about it, but that would be where you're wrong. So by now, the first episode of a new series that I'm doing where I'm looking at the Suckless software should be up by now. So I'm going to start with ST because that's what I use on a daily basis. And the first video that's gone up was about how to actually install it. So from there, I'm also going to be doing how to patch it, how to theme it, how to actually do that shell script thing that I mentioned before, where you can actually run a shell command from within the ST source code, which is really useful because it doesn't have clearing by default. So you can't do like Control L to clear your screen. I don't know why that feature's missing. That's a pretty basic feature of every terminal that has existed for a very long time. When I'm done with that, I might move on to things like DWM and Surf. I don't use Surf, so probably not, but I might switch to DWM at some point. I don't know. So I have absolutely no plans to stop using Suckless software, and I would like to see more people using it. I want to see a change in the mentality around this software. I want to see more users coming in, trying to actually understand how the C code works, asking those stupid questions that have been answered 100 times. But also, I want this to happen because then those resources will be available for future users after that. So if you're going to ask a stupid question like how to theme it, then once that question's been asked a couple of times, then it'll start showing up in search engine results. So instead of asking that question again, then someone can search for that and see, oh, here's a really good answer to that. The problem is that a lot of these things like theming and changing hotkeys don't have really good answers yet because of this mentality that's around this software. So hopefully my series will change something. I don't expect it to because I only have a very small channel, but I hope it will inspire some people to actually go and do this for themselves and understand this software, maybe make their own videos and teach people how it works. So if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe and hit the little bell icon below if you want to see more from our channel. I've got a Twitter account where I post updates, and I don't know, I might post some updates where I'm modifying ST or various other things. So if you want to leave a comment, if you're from the Suckless team or you're a Suckless fanatic and you absolutely hate that I'm doing this, then I don't really care. You can leave your comments, leave your dislikes, do whatever you want. But if you're anyone else who's sensible, who actually just wants to use really good software, but wants it to actually be written in a way that can be understood, or you'd like to have someone actually help you understand it, then leave a comment letting me know what you feel about that as well. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.